Hello. It's loud. My name is Porter Wilkinson. I'm the Chief of Staff to the Board of Regents at the Smithsonian Institution. I'd like to welcome you to the historic Arts and Industries building and thank you for joining us for this short conversation about the future of the Smithsonian. This event is also being live streamed on the Smithsonian's website, si.edu, and on Facebook Live. So I'd also like to acknowledge our online viewership. In just a minute, we're going to have 4 leaders from the Smithsonian unveil their bold vision for growing the institution's reach, relevance, and impact over the next 5 years, leading up to the institution's 175th anniversary. The Smithsonian is probably best known for its world-class museums. But today, we hope to show you that we're doing as much to shape the future as we are to preserve the past. At the end of the conversation, we'll give you all an opportunity to ask questions. For those in the audience, we'll pass around a handheld mic. And for those of you online, if you'd submit questions to comments.si.edu. This event is also the kickoff to the long conversation, a series of dialogues between leaders of the arts, humanities, and sciences about ideas that make them optimistic for the future. We were excited to pair these 2 events because the long conversation illustrates how the Smithsonian 2022 plan is going to work in the future. By gathering people of all ages and backgrounds to plan, learn, and dream on a national and global scale. Both events also capture our optimism about the future. When we are at the Smithsonian, whether you're talking to a curator about an exhibit, or an educator about a new initiative, or a scholar about a recent discovery, you'll see and hear stories of creativity, service, courage, and preservation. And today, all of our speakers will capture this basic institutional belief in the resilience and ingenuity of the American people and those all over the world. With that, I'd like to welcome our short conversationalists to the stage. Thank you.
Very nice.
Okay, David, let me take the first question. You ran Cornell University for 8 years, and you dealt with alums, and you dealt with donors, and you dealt with Board of Trustees. Now you've been running the Smithsonian for a number of years. Which is easier, and what is more fun?
Gee, what a loaded question from my boss. As I'm sure you know of all people, David, one doesn't run Cornell University or the Smithsonian. One tries to stay a half a step ahead of some of the personnel. But they're both terrific, and they're both terrific in the same way. They're organizations peopled with creative individuals who get up in the morning and have a passion for teaching, discovering, sharing things with the public. And it's the sort of an organism that isn't really led, but sort of persuaded to continue to stay the course. And we're in our 172nd year now at the Smithsonian. And of course, you expect me to say this, but I've never been more optimistic about a cultural and educational organization than I am about this one.
Let me ask you a follow-up. 172 years in, why does the Smithsonian need a strategic plan? Presumably we've been doing things for 172 years. Why do we now need a strategic plan to tell us what to do in the future?
I know you like when I grade your questions. That was an excellent question. That was, I would say that was an A- question.
Okay.
The minus because I was told you were going to ask me one question, and then I was going to get to unload on a representative.
I'm better at asking questions than answering them, so that's why. Go ahead.
What was the question again?
The question is, why after 172 years do we need a strategic plan?
Well, the only reason to have a strategic plan in a creative organization where the real work, the real terrific stuff is happening locally, in laboratories and studios and other places, classrooms. Only reason to have it is if the organization wants to make a slight turn in what's already been a very strong trajectory. And I do believe we need to make a couple of turns. One turn I think we need to make is to realize that although we got about 30 million visits last year on the Mall and elsewhere in Washington and out in Chantilly, Virginia, at the Udvar-Hazy Center and in New York City, we're here to reach far beyond those who are fortunate enough to come across our thresholds. And so we need to begin to look more outward and think even bigger than we've already thought about how our reach and relevance could occur. That's one thing. And secondly, and it pains me to point this out on an otherwise very happy day, that we're living in a time that's fragmented, that's difficult, in which people are grasping to find institutions, let alone individuals, whom they trust. And if you look at the polls, checking with the public about their levels of trust, many institutions in our society have plummeted in trust, but interestingly, libraries and museums tend to float much higher in a trust level. And given the assumption that the public does have trust in museums and libraries as honest brokers of information, and given the trust that generations of good work people like Kirk have done to establish that trust in the Smithsonian itself, I think we have the responsibility to try to convene some difficult conversations in a safe setting where people can hear different points of view and perhaps look to find some common ground.
Okay. So, you want to ask a question, or can I ask you a question?
You could, whatever.
Doris Matsui is a member of Congress, and as many people here may know, the system that we have at the Smithsonian is we have 9 citizen regions and 6 congressional regions, and the Supreme Court Chief Justice is the Chancellor. So you're one of the 3 members from the House of Representatives.
Right.
You're representing the Democratic side. You previously represented the Democratic side when it was in the majority. Now it's in the minority. And you did a great job in the majority and doing a great job in the minority.
Thank you.
What do members of Congress actually think about the Smithsonian?
Well, as a member of Congress myself and as a region, I guess I'm really partial to what's going on here. But I have to tell you there is wide agreement, and this doesn't always help in Congress at all, but we all love the Smithsonian. And we love it because of the fact that it's an institution that is honorable, has integrity, and it has a vast array of many specialties, but in a sense coming together. I can't believe how many times members have come up to me and said how wonderful it is to have the Smithsonian for its constituents as they come into town. And I think it's wonderful to hear that, but I'm also following upon what David has said too. You know, I was part of the first strategic plan where we really identified key areas in which we're building upon now. But things like unlocking the mysteries of the universe and the biodiversity of the planet and world cultures and what it means to be an American, and also the importance of arts and design. Those are the types of things that people look at, and when I look at the Smithsonian today, even though members might come up to me and talk about air and space, natural history, American history, they're also talking about what can happen in the Smithsonian, and that's what we're trying to do with the next strategic plan. And I know that's what Kirk is doing here too, because you're part of this new strategic plan that pushes everything out. And I think it's wonderful because we've identified the challenges and the areas we want to work in, and you're already doing that. And what we want to do in this day and age in a digital capacity to even attract more audiences and listen to them. And I think you're already doing that.
Well, you know, I'm a museum guy through and through. I was a museum kid, and I run a big museum. And there's a magic in museums. And I've talked to famous people, and I said, what inspired you? And they said, well, I was 4 years old, and my mom took me to a museum, and I saw this dinosaur or whatever it was, and it changed my life. And we know that just one encounter with a museum can actually change your life. It's like an inoculation of curiosity. So I believe in the magic of museums, and here we see literally 25 million people a year in these museums. But since I was born, the population of the world has doubled. There's now 7.5 billion people out there. And since I graduated from college, we've had this thing called the digital revolution, which has fundamentally changed how information flows. And now people are not just going to museums, but they're in this sort of two-way conversations with each other and the whole world. And so suddenly, it's not just this nation that's our audience, it's the world. And part of the plan is, let's go after 1 billion individual unique people a year. And you think that's crazy, but it's just not even that crazy. There's lots of companies that have been formed in the last 20 years that easily reach 1 billion people a year. So why wouldn't the Smithsonian tackle something like that?
You know, I love your telling us that since you were in college, so long ago,
Yeah.
that so many things have changed. So for an elderly guy like you, I'm just curious, do you still believe that the authentic object that one might stand in front is important? Or are you somehow suggesting that we can sort of blow all that stuff off and just put them on these devices and call it good?
You know, the thing about it is that digital things have disrupted so many industries, but museums have always been the place where our culture keeps what it respects and admires about the natural and cultural world. We are the holders of our culture's icons. And this has been going on since the beginning of the Enlightenment, when people started collecting these little cabinets of curiosities and then started saying, hey, there's interesting stuff and there's knowledge, and you start studying it. And we're in this Arts and Industries building, which opened in 1881. And the first director of what was then the U.S. National Museum, this guy George Brown Goode, was the first guy who said, hey, not only the things and the scholars, but in fact, this is for the people as well. He was what was known as a new museum man, and he added the audience to the mix with the objects and the scholars. And that's what we've always been. And I think that well into the future, we're going to be the last bastion of the real thing.
Yeah.
Well,
I think that's
let me ask you about that, if I could. You're an expert on dinosaurs, I think it's fair to say.
Somebody's got to do it.
And people make fun of dinosaurs all the time because they say you're a dinosaur. But dinosaurs lived on the face of the earth for 200 million years. Humans have only been around for about 200,000 years, Homo sapiens. You think we're going to make it for 200 million years?
Well, think about this. I mean, we've been around for 200,000 years, but the last 50 years has been the most consequential part of human existence on the planet. Our population has gone from 1 billion to 7 billion in that, this last 200-year chunk of time. So next 200 million years, I think, is a bit ambitious for us. And I think the typical mammal species on the planet lasts about 1 million years. So that might be a better question. Will humans get to live out their 1 million year existence on planet Earth?
What is the fascination that people have of all ages with dinosaurs? And when was it realized by humans that there were dinosaurs?
So the Smithsonian was founded on August 10, 1846. 4 years before that, the name dinosaur was coined by Richard Owen in England. So the Smithsonian is 4 years younger than dinosaurs, if you want to think about it that way. And there's been a lot of great things. I mean, since 1995, the known number of dinosaurs has doubled. I mean, people go out every summer and find more dinosaurs. It's an active field of research. It's not just dinosaurs. It's all sorts of other living things preserved as fossils. And the story of our planet is literally underground.
Well, just yesterday it was revealed that some dinosaur eggs were discovered in China, little bones in these eggs. Is it possible to do a Jurassic Park ever? Is that ever going to be possible that we can bring back dinosaurs?
Yeah, guys like me dream about stuff like that, but we do know that DNA is a very delicate molecule, and it comes apart pretty fast with temperature. So the oldest DNA in the world is probably much, much younger than that, in the order of 50,000 years, not 50 million years. But hope springs eternal because birds are dinosaurs, so we might be able to back engineer a dinosaur and get you your live dinosaur.
Representative Mitsui, it's going to fall to us to rescue this conversation
I know.
from talking about dinosaurs and things in the past. We're more modern, almost millennial in spirit. And what are you laughing about, Johnson? Anyway, you have the perspective of having been there at the creation of the earlier strategic plan.
Creation of it, yes. Mm-hmm.
And one of the, I chose that word perfectly. Anyway, one of the interesting things about that plan, among many interesting things, was that it began to put an emphasis on digitization of some of our collection. And the collection is massive, roughly 155 million things.
Right.
145 million of which are under the purview of the National Museum of Natural History. But I know that our professionals in the office that works on digitization have identified roughly 15 million things, to be digitized, and we're already past the 3 million mark on that.
Right.
And just the number alone doesn't really tell you everything, because one tick mark can be a very important piece of paper in an archive, or one tick mark can be a scan of the entire Apollo 11 capsule.
That's right.
So what do you perceive to be the progress and where we stand right now in that digitization process? Because it really started under your watch.
It did start during that time, because when we saw actually what we had in the Smithsonian, it was really truly remarkable. And we wanted to push it out to the world, and we really couldn't at that time. So the digitization process started a lot in the Natural History Museum and other places too. Now it is happening all over, and I think this is the excitement of it, because we are really pushing out things in a way where we can have conversations digitally. And I think this is what we want to do here. We're talking about the universe, talking about what's going on in the stars, we're talking about what's happening on this planet. And sometimes very difficult conversations can be put together in the digital manner too. We have so much information. I can almost find a time when a kid goes on and doesn't necessarily go to Google or something. They might just right away go to Smithsonian and go and really understand that this is the real deal. And I think this is what's important about the Smithsonian. And we want to do the 1 billion, I guess, contacts throughout the year. That to me is, it's going to be achievable, because look at what's happening today with young people in particular. Where do they get their information? What I love about the fact is what we're doing at Smithsonian is connecting what's on their smartphones to the fact that there's something real that exists here on the mall. And I think that's really important for young people, and the conversations you can have with young people in a manner which maybe they don't have otherwise.
You know, this whole idea of being able to connect with the digitized objects, and we don't just digitize to digitize for its own sake. We scan objects to get the information that's embedded there. And one example is the National Herbarium. We've scanned over 1 million herbarium sheets this year, and we're now able to use computer learning to actually identify the family of plant that's on the sheet. So imagine somebody in South America with an iPhone snaps a picture of a tree, and now they can access all botanical knowledge, and that's where most of our food comes from, and many pests are involved with foods and plants. So there's a connection between deep knowledge, and that's something you can't yet do on the web.
Right.
You can't actually get to really deep knowledge.
Exactly.
You can get lots and lots of information, but there's deep knowledge in these buildings that gets unleashed by digitization and technology.
You know, one of the headlines or the subheads of the whole strategic plan, which I remind you we're supposed to be talking about today, not necessarily how long humans will live or
that's interesting.
dinosaur eggs.
Dave,
I do my best with these people, Representative. But anyway,
it's difficult, challenging.
We're talking about greater impact, and I think anyway, as a career-long educator, that there's nothing that has impact like education. Because you change a young or older person's life by an educational experience, and the ripple effects are massive, just massive. And so I just wanted to point out two interesting things of the plan going in sort of two different directions. On the one hand, we want to reach out hugely broadly and offer our stuff to people, 1 billion a year, so that we can allow, in an informal sense, education to affect the broadest swath of humanity possible. At the same time, as a nonprofit, realizing that we owe some special effort to the community in which we live. We're also focusing a lot on the city of Washington.
Right.
And one of the sub-goals in the plan is to reach, in a meaningful way, every K through 12 student in the greater DC area. And I'm just curious, David, what's your thought about that piece of the plan?
When I go around the country and talk to people about the Smithsonian, the most frequent comment I get is, when I was a young kid, my parents took me to the Smithsonian. And people often cry about the experience because they remember it so fondly. And one of the things that many people remember is the Smithsonian, when they went there, was free. Free. Thanks to the Congress, we have the money to do that. In the strategic plan, there are a lot of ambitious things. Is there any desire for regular admission to the Smithsonian museums to do anything like charge admission?
Not while I'm secretary, because first of all, the generosity of Congress, and I use the word decidedly, has really been terrific. During the Great Recession, thanks to the members who view positively the value of the Smithsonian, we've been flat in nominal dollars, which is really a big vote of confidence. Not just for that reason, but because lowering the threshold to access to this collection is really what we're all about. So I think it's very important for us to continue to be free and open, and not only the museums themselves. I want to get back just for a moment, if I might, David, to the educational aspect. I want to remind us of the Smithsonian Science Education Center, an interesting entity that we don't talk about as much as, and is less recognized than, of course, our beautiful museums. It was started in concert with the National Academies and now is completely subsumed in the Smithsonian, and develops STEM curricula, free and downloadable for K through 12 with some focus in the middle school range. And it's downloaded by teachers in something like 1,500 school districts in every state in the Union and in over 20 other countries. So I do think it's very, very important for us not only to remain free crossing the thresholds of the museums, but to continue to push our information out freely to the public.
So the money right now, the 2/3 of our budget comes roughly from Congress, congressional appropriations.
Yep.
Where does the other 1/3 come from?
Some come from very generous people like yourself who support the Smithsonian, and in your case, of course, so many other entities in a philanthropic basis. And we've been able to astoundingly accept philanthropic funds at a level that I think is breathtaking. We don't have alumni in the usual sense. To my knowledge, we don't have a varsity football team. I'm still learning new things about the Smithsonian. But it's just an extraordinary amount of philanthropy. And then we have what I call generically retail. We have magazines, especially the Smithsonian magazine, but also American Indian and Air and Space. We also have a record label, which I'm hugely proud of, that has so far earned 7 Grammy Awards. In fact, if anybody here would like to call my office and be put on hold, you will listen to Folkways recording music while you're on hold. I've heard that some people call my office purposely when they know I won't be there so they can hear the music.
Well,
and
so you have a keyboard in your office because, you're learning how to play keyboard, right?
I am able to brag a little bit about my keyboard skills. I'm to the level of a 2-year-old now, that I can recognize, I can find the keyboard, I can reach up and touch the keys. But I've got high hopes to hit age 3 by the end of the calendar year.
Better than me, because my last name is Rubenstein. My mother thought I might have piano skills, so she sent me to a piano teacher, and he called my mother after 2 weeks and said, "Save your money, he has no skills." So let me ask you, this week, the Smithsonian had a American Ingenuity Award dinner. And David, I think you were at the dinner?
Yeah.
What is the American Ingenuity Awards, and why is the Smithsonian doing this?
Well, actually, it's a great follow-on to the point that Porter Wilkinson made when she was introducing the panel, and that is the sense of optimism, the sense that with all the issues in the world that you get up in the morning, you just don't know what to say about what's happening in every way, still, people are optimistic. And the idea of the Ingenuity Awards, as I interpret them for the last 6 years, is that if you identify and celebrate people, young people, older people, even dinosaurs, who have been able to do things, think things, discover things, imagine things that the rest of us have not, and what my wife likes to call, on the basis of curiosity, the basic engine of creativity, well, the Smithsonian Magazine leadership, especially Michael Caruso, the editor-in-chief, decided to celebrate that by having a sort of an awards ceremony in which different categories of endeavor would be celebrated. And in fact, this very event that we're having today is part of the Smithsonian Ingenuity Festival, which included the Ingenuity Awards just the other night. And this was a very humbling experience. There was a 12-year-old young lady there who decided to develop a nonprofit effort, so to speak, not an incorporated nonprofit, to bring books to underserved young ladies. And she originally did it with a hashtag that had the number 1,000 in it, and she's already passed the 10,000 mark, all the way to a much more experienced person, a neurosurgeon, who has been able to implant stem cells in the brains of people who have had a stroke and recover function. As a physician practicing over 30 years, I never would have imagined could have been possible. and John Legend as a performer and other things. So it's a way of recognizing that optimism can be realized, that dreams can be realized, and why not celebrate them through the Smithsonian?
That's really the whole point of the plan, is to frame the tools to think about a positive future. Once you frame that positive future, it's easier to make your way to that future rather than living in space.
It demonstrates also the innovation, too.
It really does.
Of Smithsonian and the various aspects of it, whether it was music, was science, it was, everything in there that Smithsonian touches all the time. And I think that's the vision of the One Smithsonian, too. It's not separate museums. It's all these things put together in a collaboration, and you see it demonstrated up there. You realize that Smithsonian is not only a place, but it's an idea, too. Mm-hmm. And we take it to a different place all the time. And that's why I think that one of the people there talked about education, about the public access with the Smithsonian. And you look at that and you realize that's what it's all about. And that's why I believe it should be free. I mean, it's important, especially in this country. We establish ourselves as being different because we have public education. And Smithsonian is part of that, too. And that process, I believe, is important because we bring people come here from all over the country and all over the world. But when they encounter the fact that they can just walk into the museum, that is just so startling. And also the fact that that's this country. We are really an open country, and I think it demonstrates that very well.
Yeah, very much. I want to put you on the spot, Mr. Director, if I might.
Of course.
In a different hat, wearing your hat as co-chair of the Strategic Planning Committee, and I have to say that you're one of the people very much responsible for bringing us here today in a fabulous process to put it forward. And these goals in general are uplifting, aspirational, make you take a deep breath and think there is going to be a great future. But then you get to goal 7, the least sexy goal imaginable in a strategic plan. Not one Smithsonian, reaching 1 billion people and so on, but having a nimble and responsive administrative structure. And I'm just curious, where did that come from? And why is it a major headline of this strategic plan?
It grew both out of my personal experience before I came here, and then when we spoke to all the Smithsonian staff about what would make their lives different and better and how could they do their jobs better. But when I came from a medium-sized regional museum in Denver, Colorado, to this place, and I was leaving a museum that was nimble, and we worked as a team and could do incredible things quickly. And I thought, I'm going to go to the Smithsonian. It's like becoming the captain of an aircraft carrier. The thing about aircraft carriers is they turn slowly. But if you can actually make a big thing move fast, you could do incredible things. And in my mind, that's the Smithsonian has this tremendous potential. We are wrap around our government. A visiting friend from France said, this is crazy. Your government is wrapped in museums. And I think that is where we are, and we're free, which is such an incredible thing. Everybody gets to come. And the potential upside of the Smithsonian, it's a great place, but it could be so amazing. And that's, for me, a nimble Smithsonian is a way to get amazing.
If I can continue to pretend to sort of channel my inner David Rubenstein as an interviewer, I'd like to ask you another question about the plan, since I've got you on the ropes now. And that has to do with the goal that sets out the idea that we're going to understand 21st century audiences in a sort of a new and different way. Now, you oversee the second most visited museum in the country and last year's second most visited museum in the world. And so, no one on this panel perhaps is as qualified to talk about the audiences as you are. What does that goal mean about understanding and profiting from a better understanding of so-called 21st century audiences?
Well, there's two things. One of the free admission is a double-edged sword because so many people come in. There's no demographic knife that cuts off any group, but we don't interact with them because they're not going through a pay point or a checkpoint. So we actually don't understand our visitors as well as a traditional museum might, where they actually check in, have membership programs, et cetera. That's long been a situation at the Smithsonian. But something happened not that long ago, right about the turn of the century, when most of the population was born digital. And now you watch little 2-year-old babies on iPhones and go, wow, I couldn't imagine a baby be on an iPhone, but babies are on iPhones. But imagine that 2-year-old in 40 years. That's a born digital human that takes information in differently than you or I take in information. So 21st century audiences are born digital, they are talk-back audiences, they have different priorities. And here we are, 19th century institution. We've changed through our time, but we've got to pivot rapidly right about the turn of the century because the audiences have already done that, and they're ready to talk back to us.
I think that digitization is very important because we need to show people that we are living with the current times. However, there's nothing quite like going to a museum and seeing the personal artifacts and the historic artifacts, most typified perhaps recently by the African American History and Culture Museum. That museum, which was a joint venture between the private sector and the government, cost $540 million. $270 million came from the private sector, $270 million from the government. When that museum opened, it was a very emotional thing for people because a person who co-chaired the task force with you, Shirley Jackson, represented the Smithsonian at that opening. She's an African American who went to school in this city when it was segregated, came later the first woman to get a PhD in physics from MIT, and now is the head of Rensselaer Polytechnic. She represented us in a very emotional speech. But also President Obama was there and President George W. Bush was there, showing that the Smithsonian is really nonpartisan. But when people have gone into that museum, they see up close the artifacts from the history of slavery and other things, and tears come to the eyes of so many people that go there. The average person going now is spending 6.5 hours in their first visit, and they're coming back for more visits. And it just shows you that while digitization is important and you can learn so much, there's nothing quite like seeing things up close. And that's why museums are still very important, even though we need to make sure that people can learn about things on digital processes as well.
I agree. It's a great segue to give a chance for our audience, both here and virtual, to ask us some questions. And in a very polite way, Porter Wilkinson slapped all these questions in my hand as a way of shutting me up and moving on to the next phase here. So let me first ask if there's anybody in the audience with us that would like to ask a question, and I have some ones from online here as well. First, I want to give the folks who are here a chance to ask a question. Maybe while you're, is there somebody here? Over there, please, right here. And be sure to send the pop flies to me and the line drives to Mr. Rubenstein.
My question is there a unified strategy for engaging these younger people in a digital sphere that goes across all of the different properties, or is each museum designing their own engagement strategy?
Kirk, could I take a whack at this?
Sure, go.
And then you should jump in. This is one of the real delicate things about a creative, various, if I can use that word, organization, is that you can't just pound the table and say top down, everybody's going to do everything in lockstep exactly the same way. By the same token, we want to avoid the situation where we're spinning our wheels, for lack of a better metaphor, by a bunch of us trying to do the same thing in different ways where we could come together. So what we're going to be counting on is a partnership of an even better type, to follow Kirk's very important comments about turning an aircraft carrier, in which we will turn the aircraft carrier better, more quickly, and stay on a truer course by getting our heads together between the good ideas and the individual organizations and some little larger view of what might be possible. So it's really neither A nor B. It's some combination of them, as I see it.
Yeah, and I think, too, that like we've done in the Curious Center of the Natural History Museum, the engaging of teenagers and kids in this process, because they're the audience we're trying to reach, and they need to be participants in creating. And your council of students that you bring together does a pretty good job of that as well, as in sort of in educating you about what it's like to be a 13-year-old in 2017.
Yeah, just for those aren't not up here on the BEMA, the council that Kirk refers to is something that our mayor Muriel Bowser and her office helped us set up. It's a youth advisory council. To me, we have multiple youth programs, one of the finest ones in natural history, where these people give us their advice. And the interesting thing about high school students is that they don't have that veneer of civilization that we're showing here. They just go right and tell you what they think. Speaking of which, very seldom do I get to ask you questions, so let me just pounce this one onto you. Someone watching from afar asks, Does any goal in the plan stand out to you as the most important one for the Smithsonian to accomplish?
Well, I think the Smithsonian set a very ambitious goal of trying to have 1 billion contacts, 1 billion human contacts a year. That means that we have to have contacts with people beyond those in the United States. And the Smithsonian was designed to increase and diffuse knowledge in the United States. It was a gift from Mr. James Smithson. But as the Smithsonian has become so well known around the world, people look to us around the world to be leaders in museum and research activities. And so one of the major things out of the strategic plan is to make certain that people around the rest of the world see the benefits of what we have here, and hopefully they will integrate with us in some ways, and maybe museums and other things around the world will be better for their association with the Smithsonian. Around the world, we are the envy of the museum world, and we want to continue to do that, but also make certain that people all around the world have a chance to either visit here or to see online the things that we have.
Thank you. I was going to share this one, maybe go back and forth between online and here. Here's a tough one that I'd like to try to answer myself, but then I'll really appreciate everybody else jumping in. Someone asks, do you see the public contributing to the plan in any way, and if so, how? That's a good, tough question, because creative organizations like this one are made up of people who are brought in because they're experts in some field, a curator, a scientist, an art historian. And so the idea is that that person has special depth of knowledge in some area. On the other hand, I think it would not be a good thing for the foreseeable future for us to continue to think that we have all the answers and that we know what the public, quote unquote, needs to see and needs to learn. So there is an emphasis in the plan, if Kirk would agree, in that part of the goal of understanding 21st century audiences, to reach out and learn from our audiences, not only in the sense of seeing how they vote with their feet by what they come in to see, but also get their reactions to exhibitions, get their reactions to installations. We do get reactions, of course, without asking for it. Some aspects of the Smithsonian ask for it directly. We also learn a lot, I'd like to say in public, from our critics. I think it's very helpful that we have critics who weigh in and tell us how they think we're doing. But I think it is very important that we find, again, like the balance from that gentleman's question, a balance between allowing our experts to follow their proclivities without political or other interference on the one hand, but not being an ivory tower on the other hand, and allowing the public to be able to modify what we do to some extent. I'd like to ask both Kirk and Representative Matsui to answer that one.
Well, I think that you're already beginning that process anyway, because I think you go online a lot, and you have your own particular podcast, I understand, too. So we're inviting people to engage with us, and I think that's a different situation than having just a museum and just having people come through and look at things. I think the Smithsonian is great because we need to be engaging, especially as we move forward and having conversations. And that's the part of it, too, because we're going to be able to, I believe, have some tough conversations here. And as I think you said, I think David said, in this world, there are very few trusted institutions now. And the Smithsonian is, the museum is, like I said, libraries are. And I think we can open up the Smithsonian to many things digitally at first, but have open conversations here and online too, and have ideas come forward. We're not a closed institution at all. I've never seen it that way, and what we're doing moving forward is opening up even more. You know, once you go out digitally, you're going to hear everything. That is what happens. And so we're opened ourselves up already, but we're even moving further too. I think. You know,
I've just been handed a thing that says we have to wrap up in a second, but I want to just mention two things real quickly. We're going to be bold, Porter, and take one more question because there's a lot of questions out there. But also, I just want to offer to those online and to those here, if you have other questions that you wanted to ask and didn't have a chance or for whatever reason, please write me directly by email, skortond@si.edu, skortond@si.edu. This is an offer that makes my chief of staff groan because he knows what's going to happen to those when I receive them. But please write me if you don't get a chance. We'll take one more question from here, if there is one, before we break this. Was there one over here?
There's one over there.
Oh, sorry. Hey, John, how are you? Please introduce yourself. Yeah.
I'm John Wettenhall, director of the George Washington University Museum, and I really owe my scholarly career to a Smithsonian pre-doctoral fellowship that really launched, allowed me to finish a dissertation. So I'd like to know, in your strategic plan and vision, what is the place for research, scholarship, and learning in your plan?
I'm going to turn this over to Kirk, but I must say, one way you could have thanked us for your wonderful career is just not to ask us a question, but just thank us and call it good. But that's okay. Kirk, do you want to take a whack at that?
One of the incredible things the world over is that people who run museums know that they sit on top of major research institutes. And even at the Natural History Museum alone, there's 400 PhDs doing research into the natural world and human cultures. But it's really hard to convince people who come to museums that there's actually a bottom to the iceberg, if you will. And a big piece of the strategic plan is taking advantage of the breadth of the Smithsonian knowledge base, its expertise base, its resources, both its field stations, its collections, its equipment, and ramping up the ability to have more undergraduate students and graduate students, postdocs, because we're also trying to build a pipeline not only for employees here, but also for the world museum industry, because these kinds of organizations are unique. They bring together the public, scholars, objects, they're cultural icons, and they're just really incredible treasures. And ultimately, I think they're not treasures without that research core, that smart infrastructure, if you will.
That's a very important point. We do have 19 museums, but we have enormous numbers of research centers as well. And we have leading scientists and other people who do research that's cutting-edge research. And so while the public sees our museums, they often don't see our research centers around the world and those in the United States. Let me just conclude with one thing, if I could say. Everybody who's an American who wants to be involved with the Smithsonian can. There are enormous programs that would engage citizens. They can serve on advisory boards, they can help philanthropically, they can serve as a volunteer, and there's also the Smithsonian Associates, which has a program that people can participate in for a modest fee. They can get the Smithsonian Magazine, they can see all the programs, and any given day in Washington, D.C., there are dozens and dozens of lectures, programs that anybody can go to essentially for free. And I encourage people to get involved with the Smithsonian, because those of us sitting here and those of us involved in the castle and other things can't do all this ourselves, obviously. We need the support of everybody in the country if we're going to make the Smithsonian as great as the strategic plan wants it to be.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Kirk. Thank you, Doris. Thanks, everyone. Porter?
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Hello again. We're going to wrap this up with a quick video, and after that there'll be a short break while we transition between the short conversation and the long conversation. For those of you with wristbands, you are welcome to stay in your seats or wander around, but stay close because we'll need you back in your seats by 3 p.m. If you don't have a wristband, we'd ask that you please make your way to the social space, which is directly across from us, where we have some fantastic food and drinks, and we welcome you to stay and enjoy yourselves. So thank you again for coming, and enjoy the video.
The Smithsonian is a drive for curiosity, a drive to want to understand the world.
The thing that brings me to work each day truly is that aha moment.
Very few curators get that opportunity to create something from scratch. That's their vision.
There's a sense of wanting to inspire others. It's almost as if it's a calling.
I am motivated by the mere fact that
what we're doing here is bigger than me.
One thing that I've been really surprised about is actually how many resources are at my fingertips at the Smithsonian.
I hate sleeping. I just don't like to sleep because I love what I do.